Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Coffee Edition. Joining, per usual, is the future governor of Virginia, TK Eppley. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about strength building. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid.
Guess who's back?
TK, good morning.
Good morning.
We're on the new setup here today. This way you don't get distracted by all those lovely comments that we get on our live session.
I don't think I ever got distracted.
Probably not. But it's we'll see how this goes. Trying to make it get a little bit more professionalized on occasion. And I didn't, as per also usual, I didn't tell you what we're going to be talking about today, and you didn't get to hear it in the pre-side, so you have even less.
I'm probably better off that way.
Well, it's nothing bad. But where I really wanted to get today was, there's so we're getting close to the season of HR reviews. And okay. I really despise the way in which we do reviews, because everyone wants to focus on your opportunities for improvement, which is a better or nicer way of saying weaknesses.
Let's talk about what you did wrong.
Yeah, and I'm just not a fan of trying to improve on anyone's weaknesses. I think feel that you can double, triple down your strengths. You need to know what your weaknesses are. You need to know how to figure out if someone else is good at their strengths or your weaknesses. Right. But like for myself, I pay little attention to my weaknesses, and I just try to keep getting better what I'm already really good at, because I want to keep raising that bar on that piece. But what say you?
I think it's a combination. I think you always want to double down and triple down on the things that you're good at and continue to get better. And there's two ways to mitigate weakness. One is to, especially in your personal life, one is to address that and go, hey, I want to get better at that, right? I want to get more physically fit. I want to go learn something new. So then go off and do that, right? However that is. But I think especially as a leader in a professional setting, I don't necessarily need to get better at my weaknesses. I need to know what they are. I need to know how me not being good at something affects the organization. And then I prefer to go higher against that, right? So I don't have to be good at everything. I don't want to be good at everything. But you know what? I want some really talented people to work with me that are much better at those things than I am, so that we have a complete organization. And I think how you celebrate that is, as a leader in particular, and it depends on where the person is in the organization, but I'll take, for example, my direct reports. None of them have ever been exposed to the business side of a business, right? They're asked to do very specific technical things and provide value like that, and they're awesome at it, right? But I think part of it is, hey, if you've never been exposed to something, you don't know whether it's a weakness of yours or not, right? And you've never been asked to contemplate it. Well, giving people the bigger view as a leader helps that. And I'm with you. Like, I think that every day is an opportunity for a performance review. And I don't mean that in a negative way, right? Hey, we really appreciate everything you did for us today. Or, hey, let's talk about this, because I want more for you. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's like, hey, look, nobody can be great at everything, right? And I walk around the shop floor and I'm like, hey, why are we doing it this way? For this whole purpose of, I'm not asking them to change. And I don't know why we started doing something some way, because I don't have the corporate legacy of where they started and why we ended up doing something. Is it because there was only X amount of money at the time, or is it that's a great technical reason to do that, right? And let's look at what we have now for resourcing, both manpower and financial, and try to find the right thing. But it's a learning experience for everybody. But I think when you do, we get to the point where you either have to do an annual review because that's what the HR manual says, or I want to take people from a worker role into a supervisory role, or a supervisory role into a leadership role, and the company, the board requires that you to do certain things to get certain people to certain levels, right? And sometimes, say, if I want to put people from supervisory into management, we've got to, by the kind of the outline of the rules of the company, so to speak, or the corporate structure, they want us to do a performance review. Okay, I'm down with that, right? Because now it's a good opportunity to level set for the next thing, and those meetings don't have to be contentious, and they don't have to be negative, right? Because there's here's what you're doing very well. Here's the expectation for the next level. What can I do to help you on things that you think you might not be fully aware of? And we're moving you into the next level, do I expect you to know everything at the next level? No. Do I expect you to want to be aggressive about being a professional to the extent that you have to be to perform your job? Absolutely. All right. So I don't think that, I think that's very anachronistic, and it's, in small companies, I think it's almost silly, because if you touch everybody in the company every day, so to speak, that, well, what do I need to talk to you that I haven't already said? Or even if I haven't said something as the leader, or your supervisor, or as your immediate boss, if by the time we sit down after a year and you don't have a functional understanding of what's going to be said, that's my fault. That's not your fault, because I didn't articulate my feelings for you, both good and bad, right? And it's the old adage, like, never take credit for all the good and always take the blame for all the bad as a leader. Well, guess what? If you're, it's like when you go to let somebody go, it should never be a surprise if you have to let somebody go, because you've already been, trying to get them to a point where they weren't going to have to be let go, where they were going to be a performing member of the team. And if you have to let somebody go for those reasons, they're going to know about it, because you've had conversations about it. And if you hadn't, that's really bad on you, that you sat around with other people in the leadership team and just kept it a secret to yourself while you watch that person walk off the cliff. All right. Yeah. So that's where I'm at with performance reviews.
I agree. This is why I do one-on-ones. Yeah. Right. I do one-on-ones with a lot of my folks, and we don't tend to talk about anything performance. It's really about them. Whatever they want to talk about. If they want to talk about projects, fine. But really, as I explain to them, what I really want is them to talk about the thought processes that they're going through for the decisions they're looking to make. And it's not about, positive or negative. It's about how I might be able to help them think about whatever they're trying to solve, maybe a little bit differently. Have you thought about this? Hey, I'm going to let them go with it almost no matter which way they want, unless it's going to hurt them or the company. Go, fire's hot, go get burned.
Yeah.
Because you got to, but I want to try to keep working on their thought processes.
Right. They should know not to stick a knife in the electrical outlet, right? If they don't, they got to experience it once.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, maybe 5 or 6 times, but I really, I like to talk about their thought processes. I think that's the part where you start to kind of shift them a little bit. And then I found it interesting is that how many people, when I talk about, well, if we're going to do reviews, then it should be a 360 review.
Right.
I mean, maybe we don't do 360 reviews on the rank and file, but if you're managing people, then the only thing I don't like is anonymous stuff. Like, no, I'm telling you how I feel. I should know who's saying what.
Yeah, you should own it. Yeah, exactly. I'm a big believer in that. If he said, she, and here's the thing: it's in smaller companies, it's easy. In large companies, that becomes hard. I mean, how many people does Amazon employ? Right. But what I do know is they hire roughly 330 people a day.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
That's a whole company's worth of people every single day. Right. And what are some of the management challenges, certainly with anything like that, right? Because to me, it's at some point, just because it gets so big, you have to rely on some of the bureaucratic garbage that while you're going to document everything in a smaller company, as you should, you also, it's more, like I said, it's more personal. The 360 happens every day, right? I mean, nobody should be afraid to walk into my office and go, hey, that wasn't your best effort, right? And you have to, as a leader, that's a culture you have to foster. And that's why 360 is hard, because if you're going to put something out there, you got to be willing to absorb it back. Right?
Absolutely.
But I think, like, when you look at it in military units, when you have the after action report, I think that's, when after action review, when everybody sits down, kind of metaphorically takes their rank off, and, because you have the same opportunity for success or failure, and just a lot of times failure is death in the military. And you have to get thick skin, and not because people are being demeaning of you, but somebody says, hey, you're not perfect, right? Well, guess what? You're not. Like, get over that and move on, right? Because the more you have the ability to absorb that. I saw a great piece of video the other day. It was leadership in action, but more importantly, what I noticed is there was already a culture in place that allowed the employee to absorb some very aggressive counseling, right? Watching one of the highlights from one of the football games, guy makes a great play to, tackle for a loss, you really read the play well, right? It was the play was swinging out to one side. He reads it. He's either a safety or one of the linebackers. He comes zinging through the gap and drills this guy and knocks him down 5 or 8 yards. But then he gets up and stands over him and taunts him. 15-yard penalty, just basically everything you did that was awesome, you just destroyed it. Now they're going to get 15 not 15 from where you tackled them, but 15 from the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Right? The coach went mental. You can see on television certain portions of the coach like, oh man, you shouldn't be yelling at a kid like that. But the culture he had was, okay, so he was over the top. But that kid not once took his eyes off him and was saying yes sir to him the whole time. And then when the guy was done, he put his arms around him, gave him a big hug, and sent him back into back onto the bench. Right? Yeah, you can as a leader, it's hard sometimes not to lose your head, especially in the immediacy when something is critical in the immediacy. And a lot of businesses don't have that, right? Every decision you make doesn't end in success or failure the minute you make it, right? And that's from an employee standpoint or a leader standpoint. But in cases where they do, or where emotions can run high, hey, as long as everybody's respectful, and at the end of it, you gave the guy a big hug and sent him on his way. It wasn't like, I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because I want you to be better, and I want you to understand how adversely you affect the team today, right? And I think that's where people get personal, right? And even in anything, like there's, nothing, you can say a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of people, and if I say it to you, you're not going to take it personally, but somebody else will. And as a leader, it's my job to understand that everybody's equal. They're not the same. So how I talk to you and how I talk to somebody else, I probably may need to articulate the same point, but I can't or shouldn't necessarily do it in the same manner. And that, because everybody gets amped up about a review cycle is, hey, if you're the person that's directly giving that review, I would submit that you should know your people well enough to know that I can go, hey, Dan, just stop doing that. Or, hey, this is really good, but focus on this for a little bit. Where somebody else, you might have to soft pedal a little bit more. Or I might have to, with you, I can start with the negative and work my way to the positive. I'm not advocating that's the way you should do it. I'm just saying, with you, because we've known each other for so long. With somebody else, I'm going to tend to always start with the positive. And if I can balance positive and not so positive, I don't work in terms of negative. I work in, this is less good than that, right? Then unless but here's the thing, if something's negative, you should have been dealing with it at the point of attack when it happened, not waiting till whatever time drag between, then and now, right? Then and the time you're sitting in front of them. Again, it's about, my big thing with anything is your employees, your direct reports should never be surprised by what's said in a formal review. The formal review is just documenting it, right? And it can take 5 minutes or it can take 50 minutes, right? And I think about it like this: if I go into a formal review with somebody and it's more than 10 minutes long because I'm going to say, hey, these are all the things we've discussed, right? But we just talked about this yesterday, right? What else do you need to hear from me, and what else do I need to hear from you? If that gets long-winded, then you got to think to yourself, what did I miss during the year? Right? Because I'm not having that conversation that I should be regularly having with you, to the point where when I walk in, you go, hey, Fred, how's it going? Hey, Sam, how's it going? Yep, yeah, I know, we're all here. Boom, let's sign this and move on.
Yeah, it's interesting because so my little aspect of rebellion is whenever they talk about all the opportunities for improvement, I just put you already know what they are, and let's focus back on your strengths. Like I don't evaluate people, and I'm talking about like your character strengths, your strengths at your job, not
right,
but for whatever they are for you. I'm reviewing my people based on that and how they can improve those areas.
Right. I agree.
And the funny thing is, and I've yet to be able to get any HR department to do this, because they always, I assume they feel like it's counterproductive or whatever. I have no idea what their reasons are. But I tell my people, because I give them 2 basically ratings when we do this. So I'm like, look, year 1 of me having you, here's your score. Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, you got a 4.2, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that 4.2 just became your next year's 3.0.
Okay.
So, right?
I'm with you.
Meets expectations, because now my expectations of you are a 4.2. So if you got in year 2, if you got a 3.1, well,
right,
that would have meant you probably got like a 4.5 from.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to show like that's your new baseline.
Right.
And
I
so
agree with that.
and they don't really want to do it, because I go, if we're trying to improve period over period, a 4.1, 4, like to me, if you did less. So re-baseline. That's just the way in which I think. I can't get them to ever do that, but that's what I tell my folks. I'm like, look, here's how I think you did. Is that better or worse?
Really what you're creating at that point, I think it's very positive. It's have you ever heard that, Tony Robbins, have you ever heard him talk about Michael Jordan, the conversations he had with Michael Jordan?
Somewhat, like little clips.
He's like, how did you get to be where you're at? How did you, he goes, when I was a sophomore, as everybody knows, he got cut from the basketball team. And he goes, at that point, I didn't take it out on anybody else. I turned it internal and said, what do I have to do to be better? And it was work, right? And so he's like, my expectations aren't of how I compare against you. They're how I compare against my former self.
Mm-hmm.
And if you create a culture where people are always comparing themselves to their former self and not anybody else, not any externalities, that's when you're going to get greatness. Because there's only one Michael Jordan, there's only one LeBron James, right? There's only one Kobe Bryant, right? They're all fueled by largely the same thing. I have expectations of myself that far exceed yours. So what you're trying to do, and I think it's right-headed, is to create this culture of excellence where, hey, I'm not trying to be better than Joe just so I can be at the top of that pile. I'm trying to be better than my previous self,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's when, again, in smaller companies, it's fairly easy because everybody knows everybody, and it's easy to think. But in massive companies, I'm talking about for the record-keeping piece. I don't care whether you're at Amazon or a company that's got 10 people. If you're a direct supervisor, you should know your direct reports from a business perspective as well as you know yourself, or as near well as you can know yourself, right? Because that's your job, right? Your job isn't whatever widget they're building around. Your job is to take care of the people that build the widget, right? And if you're not, then when your review shows up, then you're not being better than your former self, right? But that's, I think, where the expectation, where you start to get it. But in big companies or companies that are really driven by, kind of a traditional HR model, it's about accountability. And it's like, because a lot of it comes down to raises, right? And if somebody did better, then, well, they deserve a raise. I mean, we're not saying that. But if somebody stayed where they were at compared to themselves, I can argue that we don't need to give a raise, or that we have to talk about their compensation to them in a way that motivates them to be better.
Well, this is where I also always want to separate out your review from compensation.
Right.
Because
but I'm telling you, that's why
Right,
that's where HR really wants to, because it's very tied to it. If you look at tools like Microsoft Delve, like Microsoft, the company, uses a pretty heavy-handed machine learning tool called Delve that you better put every meeting in your calendar. If you say you've got to do a report, they'll go into OneDrive and look to see when you completed it, and it gives you an efficiency score.
Yeah.
And that auto generated efficiency score goes in part to your review. And then again, if it's a massive company, that review is then tied to your compensation. Right. And that's the traditional model. And when you say you get frustrated by it, what you're saying is, hey, I want to break the paradigm of that traditional model and do something different. And HR largely is going to tell you, hey, we have a federally mandated set of guidelines in SHRM that says we've got to do things a certain way. Well, no, it says you have to have certain outcomes and you can't discriminate people, all those things. It doesn't tell me how I have to do my performance reviews. We've just chosen to do it because we think that's the easiest path through those policies and those procedures.
Right. Because the way I look at it is, and this is just in my mind because I've never been into a nuclear reactor, but the guy who, is there, or gal who's there and is just making sure all the widgets are checked, on time, every time, to me, that person's got a 3, right? They've done everything they're supposed to do, and we didn't have a meltdown. So to me, I go, it's very difficult for that person to get a 5 in anything because they're there to make sure that nuclear reactor keeps functioning the way it does, so it doesn't have a meltdown. I'd want to make sure I keep paying that person really well, right? So,
right. Oh yeah, I want
right.
Right. But again, that's like assembly line work, right? It's very technical nuance, but it's like assembly line work. I got to pay you to do something boring. Doing a scan for 2 to 3 hours before you get that person off there to take a rest. Doing that scan is a critical function.
Yeah, but that person's only going to get a 3.
Right.
And I'm going, that's why that's in my mind why I always want to separate. You did everything you were supposed to do, and it's a high stress job, and
it led us to a positive outcome as a group.
Right.
We didn't up on the news.
Right. It's the same thing, like the way in which I talk with, like I want to view my people in technology by how quickly did we recover from outages?
Right.
And did we have the same outage more than once? Because we're going to have, you can't control how all the technology works all the time. I mean, that's the whole reason why there's bugs. But we can control how quickly we recovered from it, and did we actually go through, do a root cause analysis and make sure whatever we could have done was fixed, and that way we don't have the same thing twice.
Right. I said that to my guys, I go, hey, dumb stuff's going to happen, just don't do it twice.
Right.
Right.
And what frustrates me beyond all get out is when those same things happen again. Like I go, we're going to have an outage. We should know about our outage before any of our user base and customers. Now, there's always going to be that time, that you don't, but that window is, like, as an example, a product that we have that, is just logging into all of our online, pieces because it's kind of third parties. Well, we've got that set up where it's like on a 5-minute interval. So there is the possibility that, it checked it and then it went down and then someone reported it, right? 5-minute window. Okay. But, that's going to be somewhat rare. The issue is, for me, did you test it? How do you know it works?
Right.
It's like, how often are you testing to see if your alert notification system even works? I just go back and I think about as a kid when all of a sudden you'd just be interrupted in the middle of the show, and it's like, this is a message from the emergency broadcast system. They're testing to make sure everyone gets the notification. So I go, why?
They don't ever do that. That test never occurs during the Super Bowl either, right? There's a smart time and a dumb time to test things, right?
Yeah. So those are the things that when I look at my folks in technology, I go, how this is, because that's to me the equivalent of you were just doing everything you were supposed to do. Now,
Right.
then getting above that 3 aspect is, well, how much did you truly try to improve yourself? You should, like, you tell them, because and this is another big thing I think many managers don't do. There's only 3 things we get to define in any project: the what, the when, and the how.
Yep.
I am largely never even going to talk to you about the how. That's for you to figure out, because you're the one that's going to do it. The what, my people have a little bit of a say, but largely that what is defined amongst myself and my peers, because we're at the C-suite. But they'll have some input, but very little. The when, I'm asking you when can you get this done, knowing everything we've got, and then it's my job to sell that to my peers. And if we can't, then we'll change whatever thing is preventing that when from happening. But
I think sometimes the when is predefined, and you're going in there saying, hey, it has to be done by this. Are we being too aggressive with the time? Like, somebody start from the day we have to execute, walk it back, and tell me if we end up going back in time. Because if we end up going back in time, we've got to come up, I've got to come up with a different way to get us there.
Right. I typically do it as, like, okay, we've got this project. The project's been approved. When do you think you can get this done by? Let's look at all the resources. Don't just throw, don't put a blindfold on and throw a dart and see where it lands. Like, when do you really think this can happen? Because a lot of times these new projects, unless there is a specific deadline, most of the time for us, there is no has to be done by this date. There's going to be things like there's regulatory stuff that happens. Okay, hey, new laws are going in. That upgrade's got to happen on this date. But largely, these are new projects that, if we don't like the when, then it's, well, what's then I go, and again, for me, I might say it's perfectly fine. I just go back to my peers and go, okay, this is when it can get done. If they don't like it, and I go, well, here's all the other projects. Is there like you've said, this project is important. So which one of these things in our priority list do you want to move?
It's the benefit of a great roadmap.
Yep. We can move anything anytime, but
it protects the company against its worst instincts of recency bias. Right? Yeah. What's the hottest thing? Well, it might not have been what we've been working on for 9 months because somebody saw something over the weekend on television or read an article and said, oh, we got to do this. Because why? Because somebody else is doing it too. Okay, great. Let's, what are we not going to do?
Right.
Well, there's a list. We got X amount of dollars. I got X amount of people, and I got time. That's all I got.
Right. Now,
tell me how we're going to manage that with what you guys want now.
Absolutely. And so the reason why I want my folks to always define the when is because then they have no excuse to not deliver it on time. I didn't tell you when it was supposed to be done. You told me, and I just held you accountable to your word.
But here's the thing, and I think the other thing, especially when you're trying to develop folks from being good individual contributors to start having some, managements and then moving into leadership skills, is creating personal accountability. Right? If they give you a when and you think it's going to be too aggressive, I know you well enough to know you go, okay, cool, I love that. I love that idea. Go. And you're in your mind going, there's no way they can do that. It might be a week off or 2 weeks off. But you're right. If it's not time critical to the business, like we can accept that work whenever it's done completely and correctly, then you have an opportunity to teach.
Yep.
Right. And the opportunity that you have, and the other opportunity is you also get to put an employee or put one of your directs into a position where they have to at some point go, that wasn't so good. I got to go tell somebody. Because I don't care if you come to me 2 or 3 weeks before and I go, or a month before and I go, hey, I think we're going to need to adjust this time because of X, Y, and Z. Right? Because now you're seeing somebody that's a thoughtful human being that made a decision based on a certain aperture they had of the problem. And what just happened is midstream, they opened up the aperture.
Yep. Because
they got new information, they learned from it. If they come to you in a timely fashion and say, hey, basically, I didn't know what I didn't know, or however they talk about it, but they're going to have to be self-effacing because they gave you, here's when the outcome's going to happen. Now it's not going to happen. But you can't wait till the end when, and it's going to take another couple of weeks. Well, it's supposed to be done today. Right? Now, you can you can sit there and tell tell the rest of the C-suite or your peers that, hey, look, this is what we're doing. I know this is going to take 2 weeks longer than he said it's going to take, but by the same token, this is a great learning experience, right? I want to see how this person handles this. I think that's, that's on you as much as it is on them. So, hey, if you can let somebody pay out the rope to help learn, either put the noose around their neck or tie a better knot the next time, what are they going to do?
Right.
Right. And I think that's where somebody goes, in my mind, from a 3 to above a 3, because they saw what was happening. They reacted early to new information, whether you had the information or not. They reacted early to new information in their life, and then they went and put everybody that needed to be told in the know that the date was going to change. I'm totally cool with that. And that's a great way to let somebody learn if you have the opportunity to do it.
Absolutely. And the way in which I look at it is, it's very easy to put things in simple terms, especially like on a dashboard, green, yellow, red.
Right.
As soon as it goes from green to yellow, like it should never go from green to red. Never. Right. It goes green. As soon as it hits yellow, then that's when you're supposed to raise your hand and say, hey, there's a problem. Okay. Now, as the manager aspect is okay, because you're only late when it's, red, and then you basically missed it. We figure out why it's yellow and what that new date's going to be, because perhaps it's the assembly line broke, and therefore there's these delays. It's going to take 2 weeks to fix it.
I think today the great example is supply chain challenges.
Right. Sure.
Right. We can't, how can I hold somebody accountable to a timeline when I can't guarantee when we're going to get pieces and parts to do what we need to do?
Absolutely. So in that particular moment, as now it's yellow, because now I've accepted a new date, you're back green. I'm now managing you based on the new baseline, not the old one. And so it gets back to that, because it should never go to red. If it's the red,
go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. If it ever gets to red, that means that's when that person didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Right. Well, I think you have to create a culture of comfortable accountability where people aren't fearful of retribution or they raise their hand when something's not perfect. There's a great story about Mullally when he took over at Ford. He came from Boeing and stuff like that, and he was effectively the first non-Ford to run the company. And they're losing $1 billion plus a month, right? He's like, he gets in there and he's like, he goes up on all the dashboards, every line is green. He's like, how can this possibly be green if we're losing this kind of money every month? Goes meeting to meeting, and as the story goes, like some young VP finally got the stones to make a line yellow. And he's like, obviously it's this sea of green, this yellow. What do we got over there? Well, here's the thing. This is where we're at. This is why my division's been losing money. He totally went and promoted the guy.
Yeah.
Basically set this culture. It's like, hey, if you're going to be accountable to yourself and to us, we're gonna reward that, because that's the only way we're going to fix any problems.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that drives me, nuts when I go into these like all managers meetings and everyone's reporting a status of green, and then I go back and I look at the goals and I go, how are our statuses on all these things green, but we're not making the goals? Like the goals are red. That's the results. Okay. This doesn't line up. If we're saying all of these things are green, then how come it's not? Why are the results red? Maybe I'm colorblind. I don't know, but I just go, this doesn't seem to add up to me.
Right.
Like, as one of the things in which, we are viewed at as a credit union for a goal is new members attained. Like, how many new members are we getting?
Right.
And then another portion gets part of that. How many were obtained online? We have generation goals that we're trying to do, things like that. And I go, we're saying we're doing all this great stuff, but our membership, may not be growing the way that we said we were. Well, what's the reason? Well, last year was pretty simple. It was COVID. No one's going out looking for things.
Yeah, nobody's walking into a branch to join, right?
Right. But what was what I questioned was, we know that like a lot of the ways in which we obtain new members are by doing all these different community events, and you can sign people up right on the spot. You can go to one of the businesses and kind of, pitch that aspect there. Well, none of that stuff was going on. So then why did we, this is my question back. I was like, well, why are we still going on the same goal? Like, this goal shouldn't even be a valid goal for this year, because it's not possible to obtain because of the environment.
So do you have new members attained, or is it about growth, right? Because if I attain 100 new members, but I lose 105, that's bad.
Well,
is it about
correct.
churn as much as anything?
Yeah, it's so mostly it's about new members obtained. But this is just this is like an old school thought still in my mind, because I go, do we want to count members, or do we want members that count? Right.
That's what I'm driving at. Is like,
I believe the better overall way of doing it is, how many members do we have that we can feel like, there's some statistical measures you can do, that we feel like that we're their primary financial institution.
Right.
Now, and part of those ways in which you can get that idea, and you don't necessarily know it 100%, is, are they getting a direct deposit from into us, and are they paying some bills online through it? And if the answer to both of those questions is yes, then we have to assume we're their primary financial institution. There's always, many people have many different ones, but if they're doing those two things, they're probably, at least we're being used.
Right.
The other thing that I look at is, how many products do we have of theirs? Like, do we have their mortgage? Do we have that, the checking account where the direct deposit's going in and bills are being paid out of? Do they have a car loan through us? Do they have one of our credit cards? Like, I want products, how many products per household. To me, that tells me we've got a very sticky member. I want that to be the goal. And now there's some things that are about that. People typically don't care where they get their mortgage from. They go wherever the lowest rate is.
I was curious to say, you look in the 70s before online. Like, I remember, my parents went to one bank for everything.
Yeah.
New bank manager, they was a friend of theirs, that kind of thing, right? I think now you're right. People, especially with the online mortgage industry, you're going to have to beat some very aggressive people to get in line. Now, car loans are a different thing, right? Car loans, I don't know how many people just walk into a car lot and take whatever they can get, or they're informed when they go there. I've done it before. I walked in and go, hey, this is what my bank's offering me. If you can beat it, then we'll do it. Right.
Right.
And then they might beat it, and then a week later, I'm going to give it to my bank anyway, because I know it makes it much easier.
Absolutely. And so with the mortgages, the one interesting trend is Rocket Mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Their rates are not the best, but what they deliver is so far the most convenient way of getting it. And now they are trying to own that whole experience. From, you go there, they've got their real estate agents, their title company, the whole aspect being done in one shop.
Isn't Zillow doing that to a certain extent?
They've got some partnerships in there. Okay. But I don't know if they've gone through that whole aspect. At least I don't think so. They might, but
I know from like the real estate agent side, there's some kerfuffle with all of, kind of how aggressive they are with fees and things like that. Because you can, I guess apparently you can go onto Zillow, and then you can create your whole buying experience. I don't know if that extended into mortgage or not.
Yeah, I don't know if it does. I didn't look at it. I only happen to know this aspect about Rocket Mortgage because it's been, they announced all this stuff and started looking into it, and I'm like, wow. Now, the only thing they don't do at this moment, and this is a big, this is how a lot of these fintechs like Rocket Mortgage wind up being able to kind of stay out of the heavy regulations, because they're not taking deposits. They're not a checking account. Like, once you start getting to that part, Now all of a sudden the regulators come at you. But speaking of which, all right, help me understand this one, TK.
Uh-oh.
I'm trying to figure out why the president has nominated a lady to oversee banks that went to the University of Moscow.
And not the one in Idaho.
Yeah, like in this, I'm really trying to understand that particular logic there. Maybe you could help me out with that one.
I don't have,
because you probably knew, you were probably around when Lenin was there and she won the Lenin Award. So I'm just trying.
He was just a kid back then.
It just it's a little bit of a tangent as we got into the financial, but I'm scratching my head going, what?
I think we've done a pretty good job over the past years of kind of staying in the middle of the road with politics. And I'll frame it like this way: if you're an extreme progressive and you're on that side of the thing, you're happy because you believe that there should be more state control of the money, because you view that the big problem in America is the wealth gap between the wealthiest people and the poorest people. And if you're on the other side of that coin, you're going to view that that there's no other way to explain it, right? If you're on the extreme other side of that argument, that there's no other way to explain it other than it's somebody that's trying to destroy the fabric of the nation to get to the other side's goal. Right? That's where we're at in America now. And the third rail is getting in there and talking about it.
Right.
Right. But a lot of in politics in the last 10 years, a lot of the decisions that are being made, you're just like, what's the long-term goal other than to do X or Y, right? And people, when you hear people talk about things, and I mean, think about COVID, right? I mean, there's little or no argument to be had, right, in the public space, right? And a lot of folks are like, hey, if you disagree with that everybody get a vaccine, then they're gonna deplatform you. And if you say, hey, I believe there's other alternatives, then you're called a flat earther, right? And so I think just as in most other things that we've got into politics today, it's almost counterproductive unless you want to stand up and just start screaming at the thing and going, hey, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and you're wrong, right? But I mean, the easiest way for us to get deplatformed off, get EchelonOrchid kicked off the internet, is to start having a very, very stringent opinion about this. I'm not saying you shouldn't have one, right? But if you look at it from both sides of the coin and go, well, what's the achievable goal, right? Then the problem isn't the fact that they nominate a person like that, right? That's the president's prerogative to nominate whoever he wants, right? Congress and Senate in particular has an advice and consent role that they should question that. Knowing that, I think most reasonable people in America would say that, hey, if you've got somebody that went to a Russian university and espouses wealth redistribution, then we have to talk about that in the U.S. in an open platform. We can't just close our eyes and press the A button to give the president what they want. That's not what the framers intended.
No. Like, I can't remember. I always forget his name, but the person that the president nominated for the attorney general, who was a SCOTUS nominee, but the Senate never acted upon it under Obama.
Merrick Garland.
Yeah, Garland. I had, for the most part, largely, even when he was nominated for SCOTUS, I'm like, seems like a reasonable dude. No problem. No problem with him being the attorney general. I kind of question, why would you want to leave a lifetime appointment to something that could only be one term? I don't know the reasons. Maybe he wants to go to the corporate world afterwards. Who knows? But I'm like, hey, I feel like he's a reasonable dude. I'm probably brutalizing his name, Mayorkas, the Homeland Security. I'm like, well, I don't necessarily know that I agree with it, but he has been working in Homeland Security for quite a while. Okay, he's been there for prior presidents, so okay, fine. This one, I just kind of go, huh? The other ones, I'm like, okay, maybe not my cup of tea, but seems like a reasonably good pick. This one, I just can't wrap my head around.
Well, I think, for me, it's like when people start looking disingenuous in hearings. I can disagree with your point of view.
Right. Sure.
But I also understand that if I disagree with your point of view, I probably disagree with the guy that got elected to be president. Right. And even if I agree with the point of view of the president, hey, I don't have to agree with you to get up. I think with me, it's more being disingenuous. Like the guy that they put up to be the head of the ATF, he would not tell the senators what his definition of an assault weapon was.
Oh, right. Sure.
Right? No, that's beautiful. No. I want to know what your opinion is, right? And when you won't talk in terms of that, and you become cagey, it's like, hey, we're trying to find out what agenda you're going to push when you sit in that chair.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
There used to be a movie called Lord of War. It was a Nicolas Cage movie. He was an arms dealer. And when he finally gets caught, the ATF catches him and he goes, I don't think you're here for the alcohol and tobacco, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so, you know, and I've listened to and I've talked to a bunch of people, and as people pretty much know that watch this thing, I'm a pretty strict constitutionalist. Right. If there's, and it keeps us in the middle of the road. Right? We have a method to change or amend everything in the Constitution. It was made to be difficult for a reason, so we weren't slaves to the minute.
Right.
And I get it in the 24-hour news cycle and everything like that. Everybody wants what they want when they want it now. Right? But I was talking to somebody, I said, hey, you know, they were like, we've got to do all this with guns. And I go, I hear you. I understand your point of view. I don't tend to disagree, but I don't tend to agree, but I understand your point of view. Let's put it this way. We do have a method to amend the Constitution to change the Second Amendment or to abolish it, right? And he's like, well, that'll never work because 75% of Americans don't believe we should get rid of guns, right? And the only branch of government constitutionally that's designed to explicitly defend the minority is the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we've changed amendments. I mean, we outlawed liquor. Then 4 amendments later or 5 amendments later, we said, hey, that was a really bad idea. All we did was create a really big criminal underclass, and now we're gonna change that back. I think we did presidential succession. You know, things that can be done that 75% of Americans would agree on, we did. Right? And it should be hard. Right? Like I always think, like, and this is a fairly because like I think the Equal Rights Amendment is silly. Because I think 14, 15, and 16 guarantee equal rights to everybody. Right? Now, granted, it was intended for, you know, at post-slave America and everything like that, as we try to go through Reconstruction and we did everything else, but those rights are inherently guaranteed. Right? And it's like, you know, Roe v. Wade is another one. Right? We've said that legally, under certain circumstances, women have the right to an abortion. They don't have a constitutional right to it, they have a legal right. Right? And as a strong constitutionalist, I can be for or against abortion. And if I'm against abortion, I still have to say, hey, I'm going to defend that person's right to go do that because today she has a legal right to go get that procedure. And if I really feel strongly enough about it, then I'm going to put as many resources as I can to go petition Congress, my local representatives, to start to say, hey, we want to make a constitutional amendment against it. And if it fails because less than 75% of Americans believe that should be a fact.
Right.
And that's everybody wants their way. They don't want to continue a project of an experiment of self-governance in a way that's never been seen anywhere else in the world. And I think that's really where today, when you talk about whether it's nominating somebody to be the comptroller of the USA or who we put on ATF or anything like that, right? Everybody wants, whomever gets elected wants to go run to their base and pile as many people into those jobs as possible. And so every 4 years, I mean, every 8 years, you know, every now and then you have a 2-term president, but you're going to recycle 36, I think it's 3,600 plus or minus appointees that all have to be approved by the Senate, which means the role that they provide to the country is significant enough that we have to make sure that they're consistent with some sort of decent behavior in that position, right? I think that's as a country where it's less about this one nominee or that nominee. We have to take a look as a nation, and both parties and all Americans have to do it and go, hey, what are we doing, and why are we driving this bus off the cliff, right? And most of it right now, people will argue is financially,
Oh yeah, I mean it definitely is. I mean, in large part, I believe, regardless of who the president is, unless someone like who's truly just not, or wants to go against the I feel like the president should have who they want in their, their
I
nominees.
don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that, but you have to look at people and go, hey, is this person basically trying to, it's like I said, it's extreme. Like, hey, as long as the person is, not trying to usurp the Constitution,
Right.
Then if you have somebody stand up and say, I think, I don't even know what, but pick an amendment. I think we should abolish this. All right, well, get on your constitutional Congress, pony and ride that one the way it should be. Don't try to nickel and dime legislate it out of existence. Right? And that's really in all of our rights. There's a big argument now that, like, hey, if you deplatform a medical doctor for a stance that is less than wholly owned on getting a vaccine, are you usurping their First Amendment rights? If they say, hey, I think there may be another alternative, not like, hey, I'm an anti-vaxxer, right? If they say, hey, I think, yes, okay, we need to get to a point where, sane people go, we have to get to a point where we have an approved vaccine path that has the efficacy of previous vaccines. But also, hey, there's other things that you could be doing to help yourself be healthier other than just get vaccine, right? And if they're going to deplatform people for that, are they usurping their First Amendment right?
So this is the interesting thing, which I think is going on today, is that, we've talked about the First Amendment. The First Amendment is basically freedom from repercussions from the government. Private companies are allowed to do whatever they kind of want to do, whether we really like it or not. But I think the government is doing this indirectly. And I think that's where I have the biggest problem. And I would love to see some people that are really good at FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, get to see any emails of government officials pressuring these technology companies to...
I wouldn't even say pressuring. I would say I want to know the conversation.
Yeah, whatever the conversation is. Right. Because I believe
that makes an assumption, right? What I'm saying is, I think what we're both saying is, what we're looking for is complete transparency.
Right, because I believe the government is indirectly, even if they are indirectly doing it, then they are violating your First Amendment right. Like, if Google just says, I don't want this, and the government was never involved, fine. All right, that's Google's choice. Same thing with any of the Facebook, Twitter, whatever. But if the government said in any way, shape, or form that they need to do this, then your First Amendment has been. And I think that's what's happening. I honestly, I believe that's what's going on. I would, there's a lot of people out there that do really well with FOIAs, and I would love for them to start doing that, because if it is, then the government is, I mean, I believe they're doing it. Prove that they're not. It's really the way I look at it. They're not innocent. And that's what I have a problem with. Again, Google, Facebook, whatever, if they say, look, I don't want you on my platform, what's your platform? Now, I think where things start to get tricky is when it's truly if we're saying it's critical infrastructure, like the internet, how can you say AWS is not a part of that today? Or Google's cloud, or Microsoft Azure? Like, at this point, how can you say that's, because it's the internet, it's defined now as basically critical infrastructure. If I put a system there, they should no longer, it's utility. They should no longer get that ability to take you off of that system.
Platform.
Yep.
Right.
I have no problem with them making the money that they're making, but they shouldn't be able to then dictate, because like, if we're going to do that, like, why then does Pornhub exist? Because the amount of child pornography that is in there is a tremendous amount based on the readings that I've read.
Right.
But that's the illegal activity. How do they get to exist on all of these particular internet resources? Like that's just how I want to.
We're like I said, we're both kind of in the middle of the road on that. It's like I I can see both points in a lot of cases, and I can disagree with one or the other, or a mixture of both, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think today in federal government, I think the Democrats have a 6-seat majority plus, or it's maybe 8, but they're a very slim majority, and I think what we've forgotten is coalition, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, yeah, you can win with 6 things, but you're alienating, the 50.1%, 49.8% of the population, right? And is that really what we want to do? And in thing right now, you look at the Senate, it's 50-50, right? As a United States Senator, even with a 50-50 tie, I'd be embarrassed if the vice president had to come and keep breaking ties. Because it means we can't get something that is acceptable to both parties to help the American people.
Well, and this is the interesting fact. Even when you take a look at voting, very rarely does a red state flip to blue. A Republican president really only happens when a blue state flips to red. Right. I mean, it has happened, but I mean, it's rare. And so when you take a look in Congress, it's typically the Democrat that chooses to go along and with the yay or the nay of the Republicans, and then that's where, because the Republicans don't tend to not vote for what seems to be in alignment with the party. The Democrats do change. They flip flop. I don't mean flip flop in a bad way. You just sometimes they'll go.
Like this. I think that I think a good case study is this. You got Joe Manchin in West Virginia, right?
Yeah,
he's a Democrat, but the Democrats are also trying to put his state's industry out of business.
Oh yeah,
right. And so I think he's in a very tough place, right? That he's got to a certain extent, he's got to roll with the Democrats, but every now and again, in order to stay in office and in order to have any integrity about being an effective representative of his state, he's got to be like, hey, hold up for a second, I'm not going for all this.
And as he should. I mean, that to me is a true representative of his constituents.
Right. But that's, I think he's a good thing. And there's one of the new senators from Arizona. She's in that same thing. She's defending a state position. And I think let's use the border, whether it's just faux gun hoism or whatever, you'll very rarely ever hear a Republican say anything that isn't about building a wall, about creating an effective barricade from the southern border, right? What you're seeing now is Democrats who come from the border states, now in order to get reelected, because it's becoming a local problem, not a national problem, right? And this is Congress in the House mostly, but it's always the old adage: you don't like your potholes in your roads, go get yourself a new congressman. You don't like your foreign policy, go get yourself a new senator. Right? And that goes back into, when I was a kid, that's one of the earliest things we used to hear, right? And congressmen in particular that go to the district every weekend or every other weekend and are seen in the district almost never lose, because they're seen to be solving local problems. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's what you get yourself a congressman for. Right? If you want somebody that's high-minded and supposed to have a long view, go get a senator. Manchin, for example, or Manchin, whatever his name, West Virginia senator, he has presided over the systematic destruction of the coal industry there, right? Or the attempt, I should say, to do that. What people don't realize about West Virginia and all the coal states is as long as China and India keep building coal-fired power plants, they're never going to go out of business, right? And it'll be very hard to legislate an entire block of workers out of existence for whatever reason, right? Because the U.S. has said, we're not going to build any more coal-fired power plants. I'm all behind that. Like, let's keep greening the nation up. I'm down with that. But when you want to start getting on the glide slope that some congressmen do of how quickly we want to get there, what happens when everything that China and India does belches into the sky? it gets into the jet stream, and now it affects us globally, right? Those are things, and when you get certain people of both parties, like it's really tough to be a Republican in some of these light blue states, right? Because you can say whatever you want, but you're going to lose, right? Because both parties face that, and I think those are good problems to have, right? There should be great debate. It should be tough to win on certain things, right? Where it's become tough to win is on some basic stuff, right? What we allow, how we allow other countries to treat us, how, certain things that we shouldn't. It's kind of another thing. Here's my view on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, like our problems with gun control now, and I use that term in air quotes kind of thing, it's not a gun control problem, right? It's twofold. One, it's a mental health issue, and number two, it's a hopelessness issue, right? The old adage is, there's over 400 million lawfully owned firearms in the U.S. If lawful gun owners were the problem, you'd know it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so let's look at the root problem. If you take any of the big, the big 3 or 4, whether it's Chicago, New Orleans, New York State, where we're having the major problems with gun violence. If you take every lawfully owned firearm out of the cities, which in Chicago, that's pretty much what they're trying to, they've tried to legislate, right? We can argue whether that policy is right or wrong, but if you say, hey, we've completely eradicated guns, right, legally, like we've passed ordinances and laws that completely eradicate guns in the city, but you still have all these gun crimes. Why? Right? People that are on the hardcore right about the gun, they want to make fun of this. I go, wow, look, we got rid of all the guns and people are still dying with guns. I go, we understand the problem. Like, what's the fix? It's about truncating hope, right? If you live in a world where your best day and your worst day are slapped on top of each other and there's no delta between that's your life, where, hey, today is as good as it's going to get and I can't imagine a way out of anything better, then sticking a gun in somebody's face and shooting them isn't a big deal, right? Is that a gun problem? No, that's a social problem. And we as Americans, that we don't want to tackle great problems anymore. We don't want to really fix the hard stuff, right? What's the quickest way I can put a Band-Aid on it so I can blame somebody else when it happens, right? That really is when you start talking about problems like that, where it's mental health and just social ills that have been going on for 50, 60, 70, probably since the U.S. began in different things, but how we've handled it, that's the problem you have to address. Do we as a country today have the high-minded people in office to tackle those problems? And are we ever as an electorate, by our vote, going to incentivize people that are high-minded and wanting to solve those problems to stay in Congress and work through them? That's the issue. When I look at it, that's how I was like, hey, we're not, and there's a lot of reasons when people say they don't want to run for office, but you're not getting the great titans of, leadership and people that just want to be there because they want to solve problems, right? There's an agenda and they're willing to tolerate a lot of garbage from the media and everybody else just to get where they want to go. And sometimes that's not altruistic. But if you want to solve problems, solve problems. But let's look at them in the right light. And guess what? If you take, I think, what is it? The number I heard was AOC's climate plan was $32 trillion, right? An insane amount of money. But if you took part of that money and started putting it and sourcing it towards the needs of folks that have no hope, our gun violence problem, our violence problem, right? Because more people die with baseball bats and handguns. But the concept that we've got this incredibly violent subset of Americans, but it's not strictly about violence, right? It is strictly about the lack of hope and lack of forethought that my life can be better.
True. Well said. Well, my friend, we're at that time. I'm probably gonna have to split this one up when I get these things on the Instagram at some point.
Everybody reach out and tell us how you like the new format.
Yeah, trying to, eventually I'll have this whole thing done up, but just moving in, trying to make it look like we're always in the same room.
There we go.
We'll see.
Actually, you can have a fake hand. It'll have whatever shirt I have on. You can hold my hand. You can hold my fake hand the whole time. We'll make it seem like
Thelma and Louise jumping off the cliff.
Exactly. It'll be like when we were Silent Circle together.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my friend, thank you so much. Have a great week. Everyone out there, have a great week. Take care.
All right. Bye.